There's a new chapter in the culture wars targeting library books. Alberta wants to bring in age-appropriate standards that could limit what kids at school can access. The group chat dives into what it all means, especially when certain books seem to be the target. I'm Emil Niazi in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. So last week, the government of Alberta revealed plans to introduce a new set of guidelines that will determine what books will be allowed in school libraries across the province. The move comes after Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides said that he received complaints from parents about 4 particular books. So he is inviting Albertans to take part in an online survey to help shape new guidelines that will take effect this fall. That survey closes on Friday. So 3 out of those 4 books that have been singled out by the government as being inappropriate just happen to be 2S LGBTQ plus themed. And while the province says this is not a book ban, there is concern that certain literature would be unfairly targeted. To talk about what is at stake here, I have Mel Woods of Xtra Magazine and Laura Winton, president of the Library Association of Alberta. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you for being here. Laura, let me start with you. So how do school libraries in Alberta figure out right now what is considered to be age appropriate?
Yeah, so each individual school board across the province has their own policies. Those would be collection development policies, and they're going to outline how material is selected, also how material is deselected and removed from the library. And those policies would also include policies on reconsideration of library materials. So the processes that are in place, if somebody, a parent, for example, did have a concern about an item that was in a library, there are processes in place for them to bring that forward. And that request for reconsideration would be looked at by a trained educator, probably a librarian, who would then evaluate if it's in the appropriate location in the library, if it should be removed, all of those things. And I think it's important to keep in mind that those policies are developed by trained librarians and educators. So from our perspective, the government is talking about introducing new policy, and I think librarians are looking around going, wait, we already have those and we designed them and we're really well-trained experts who know how to do that.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Laura, I grew up in a place called Surrey, BC, and my last year of high school, I remember a very similar conversation happening amongst our school board there. And I just remember it creating a very bad vibe, let's say, for students and for parents and just for the whole community. So what's the impact on kids when a conversation like this starts to take place while they're in school?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen some of the impact of this right now in the United States, in places like Florida. These policies are in place, and there's been great studies done by NYU and a few other organizations looking at the limiting effects. And I think what happens when we introduce policies like this is that the focus of education stops being on providing opportunities to kids, and it starts being on restricting. A culture of fear becomes a big part of how educators are deciding what ends up in curriculum, what ends up in classrooms, what ends up in libraries, and what children have access to. So we see a real limiting effect. Kids have less and less access to material, which means they have less and less access to different worlds and different perspectives, and oftentimes access to material that could be a reflection of some hard stuff that they might be going through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So last week, Alberta Education Minister Dimitrios Nicolaides was on CBC Edmonton's afternoon show Radioactive to explain, from their perspective, why these new guidelines are needed. Here's what he said.
Well, the main thing that prompted concern was some conversations that I had with parents who had brought some examples to my attention. And obviously that raised some concern with me, and my team and I conducted a deeper investigation, and we had found that this was indeed the case, that there were books containing graphic images of sexual acts available in several school libraries.
So Mel, there's just for the context, there's 2,200 schools across Alberta. Those books that he mentioned only appear in 58 schools. And those books are not new books. So why do you think this particular concern is happening right now? And why do you think this is happening right now?
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing that we have to be really clear about with this is that while the Alberta government has been framing this announcement as some discovery of this lewd material that's been unearthed, the only new thing here is the Alberta government's decision to care about this right now. And we have to look at the larger political context at play here. Nicolaides there was saying that he heard from concerned parents. Reporting from the Investigative Journalism Foundation last week showed that those concerned parents were the Christian advocacy group Action for Canada, which was involved in the Freedom Convoy and also played a huge role in getting the school pronoun policies in Saskatchewan introduced and in New Brunswick and the gender-affirming care attacks that the Alberta government's already taken. So this doesn't come in a vacuum. It's not just some genuinely earnestly concerned parents calling up the government and saying, get these books out of libraries. There are coordinated movements and efforts to target these books in specific. Like Laura was saying, the books on this list have been targeted in the States before. There are lists of these books that go around within these types of organizations and target specific governments who might seem willing to kind of start to help it with those campaigns. And we look at the larger political context of what's happening in Alberta right now. Danielle Smith and her government are looking at these kind of separatist folks to the further right, to the further socially conservative, and are worried about their base fracturing. And so when we see policies like this, when we see policies like this fall's attacks on gender-affirming care for young people or trans women in sports, those are coming as a part of politics. They're not necessarily coming as a genuine thing because, again, these policies actually exist already. These processes actually exist already from the people who know what they're doing. But these groups and organizations are coming to governments with intent to get these sorts of policies introduced and to stoke a culture war and to stoke a moral panic. And so I think we can never talk about these things and take what they're saying at face value and be like, oh, some genuinely concerned parents were just so worried about these lewd books. No, there's coordinated email writing campaigns. There are very kind of influential political actors involved here, and that's an important context to have.
Mm-hmm. So, Laura, how would you have preferred, the province initiate a discussion like this rather than just jumping to the survey? Is there something the Library Association would have preferred to see first, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think first and foremost, we would have loved a conversation, at least a heads up. The Library Association of Alberta wasn't contacted. The major public school boards, none of the public school boards were contacted as well. So this came as a total surprise to all of us. If the government had concerns about material that was in school libraries, it seems most appropriate to me that they would have approached school boards, potentially approached the Library Association of Alberta to get a bit more information on what the current processes look like, and then conversations could happen from there.
So the books that we're talking about, include Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, Fun Home by Alison Bechtel, and Flamer by Mike Corrado, all of which, as we mentioned, discuss and depict 2S LGBTQ plus relationships. Here is Education Minister Nicolaides again, this time talking to Kathleen Petty on CBC's Alberta at Noon.
We already have a broad, I would say, unwritten kind of understanding of what books should be permitted in library schools and which ones shouldn't. We don't have books in our school libraries about how to steal a car, how to start a meth lab, and other types of material. I think we have a general consensus of what is acceptable and what is not. And
you're comparing sexuality to a meth lab?
No, of course not. But I think a book depicting oral sex is not a title or is not something that is beneficial to have in our library.
I'm glad that the host jumped in there because I was just about to say, it's not really the same as stealing a car or starting a meth lab. Mel, obviously the government's position is that certain books have no place in school libraries. So what is the case for keeping books like the ones I mentioned on the shelves?
Yeah, I grew up in small town Alberta, and often you don't necessarily have people in your real life around you who are kind of representing those possibility models or spaces to kind of explore those parts of your identity. And part of schools, part of literature, part of media for young people is about showing them kind of the world and showing them the possibilities that exist out there and giving words and terms to sometimes messy feelings that maybe they're having or their friends are having or their siblings are having, and helping build that kind of empathy and understanding, even in straight and cis kids too. And these books are not, again, I cannot stress enough how much these books are not like lewd pornography. They're graphic novels, and most of them are actually targeted at young people, an older section of young people. And, to Laura's point, they're shelved in the right place in the library to the right audience who's going to get them. But it's important to see those kinds of coming of age stories and see that sort of representation and storytelling as kids are kind of figuring themselves out, because you're not going to, I often see these statistics out there that are suggesting that there's this big boom in trans kids, that there's more trans kids than there ever was before. No, there's more kids who have access to the language to define themselves. They're still trans, even if they don't know it yet or can't verbalize it. And books like this and experiences like this can be so formative for that. I remember reading Fun Home when I was a young person and looking at that and seeing a mirror version of myself and some of my experiences, and using that book to put that to expression. And I think these books are also very easy to target because they're graphic novels, right? And so the Alberta government released this package of materials and was like, warning, adult content only. Don't look at these scandalous images. But it's like, these kids are in sex ed class. They are getting plenty of, puberty books like those, American Girl, Here's How Your Body is Changing books, have anything different than what is in these books. And is actually frankly much more explicit than what's in these books. The Bible is more explicit than what's in these books. The Outsiders, like many books that are on school curriculum, Hamlet, like we're out here reading Shakespeare and saying that, a kid learning about how queer people love each other is more explicit and rude. And that's so frustrating to see, because it's all part of that bigger moral panic.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's also worth noting that these are all award-winning graphic novels. These have been reviewed in major publications. Here's a quote from Publishers Weekly about Gender Queer. This heartfelt graphic memoir relates with sometimes playful honesty the experience of growing up non-gender conforming. It's sure to spark valuable discussions at home and in classrooms. So this material is intended to be put in front of children. One of the book's blankets I studied in library school years ago in a children's literature class. And what we were talking about in that class was very specifically, how do we use this as material to help children understand their experiences? So, librarians know how to do this. We're thinking carefully about it. And there is consensus from experts on these books. This is not, as the minister has said, equivalent to a Hustler magazine.
Mm-hmm.
This is an award-winning text.
So Laura, you've seen the survey, as we mentioned, that the public is able to weigh in on this. What do you think of the questions and kind of how they're posed?
Yeah, I mean, the survey is clearly very leading. I think, as Mel said, they include a package of content from these books, and they have intentionally pulled out the most graphic images from these 500 plus page graphic novels. It is intended to shock. The questions are leading. So they're asking questions like, at what age do you think children should be exposed to sexually explicit material? And that sort of question is, of course, going to elicit worry in parents. And there's probably not a lot of parents who, with no further context are going to say, yeah, definitely my 5-year-old should be looking at that type of thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think the survey has been designed to get a very particular response. I'm certain they're going to get that response. We know that those groups like Action for Canada and Parents for Choice in Education are rallying their base. They're very well organized, and they're going to get people into that survey saying exactly what the minister wants to hear.
Thanks, Laura.
And then that's going to confirm what he wants.
Mel, I just want to leave it with you because, we've talked a lot about the different age ranges that are affected and also, where parents can also offer their meaningful sort of concerns. But what is the impact on a kid who's out there in Alberta, who's trying to figure out who they are as a person? What happens when books like this disappear from their school libraries?
Well, there's what I was talking about before, about that loss of kind of representation and impact. But I think on the bigger macro scale, when we look at what's happening, this conversation that's happening right now and this stoking of a moral panic, that alone is a huge kind of threat to our young queer and trans kids, our young kids who are kind of questioning themselves or feeling insecure in various reasons, who have enough to worry about going to school and getting bullied, and are watching their government say, hey, this book that's about you, it's lewd, it's explicit, it's not appropriate for anybody. That feels horrible, and that creates so many bigger problems. And we've seen this with the attacks on gender affirming care and trans youth in the province already, that this can lead to huge increases in depression and giant impacts on young people. And it's also giant impacts on affirming parents. Whenever we talk about parental rights, we rarely talk about the rights of parents to give their kids access to these materials. Again, the rights of affirming librarians to create safe spaces for their kids, to create, when policies like this come in, are we going to see retribution against librarians who do bring in affirming books into their spaces, against teachers? And I think that is a culture of fear, and it's a moral panic that's being stoked by policies like this that has huge impacts.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for taking the time to chat with us today. Really appreciate you having the conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Mel Woods is a senior editor at Xtra Magazine in Vancouver, and Laura Winton is the president of the Library Association of Alberta. She was in Edmonton. The Alberta government's public survey on these standards for school library books is open until June 6th at alberta.ca. I'm Emil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, I want to shift gears and talk about something pretty different here. It's a new sitcom that is getting a lot of buzz. Some people say this is Gen Z's first big sitcom. It's called Adults, and it is set in New York City. As all sitcoms happen to be these days, it follows a group of 20-somethings trying to make their way in the 2020s. Here is a little bit of the trailer.
Always thought the world was going to be waiting for me, and instead everyone's annoyed that I'm here. You okay?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I just need to hear from work.
What is the worst that happens?
I go broke. I can't pay my loans. I start an OnlyFans, but only you guys subscribe.
You can't do OnlyFans.
Yeah, you wouldn't make it on there, so sorry. You don't know your social security number?
No, I do. It's just that my mom, she knows the out of it.
The first couple episodes of Adults are out now on Disney+. Rendy Jones is here to talk about it. Rendy, welcome to Commotion.
Thank you, Emil, for having me.
I had to laugh at that trailer. I watched the pilot episode, and, I complicated feelings about it, as we'll get into, but it makes me think of this photo that always makes the rounds on social media of the Friends cast. Right before the pilot aired, they went on a trip, and the producer took this picture of them on the plane and said, this is your last vacation as regular people, because they just knew that this show was going to blow up. And it's so interesting to see that kind of time capsule of this massive show right before it hit big. Watching Adults, did you get the sense like, hey, this is it before these people become huge and this show changes people's lives?
I would hope so. I would say how Friends back in the day was such a different landscape in television, and it also had the advantage of being a primetime network show opposed to Adults being a series on Disney Plus or Hulu and FX, in a time where it's hard for shows pertaining to our generation to get made. But as of now, a lot of people that I know personally really love it.
Okay, well, let's get into what this show is about. Who are these people? Tell me about the cast of characters on Adults.
Adult is about a bunch of friends living in Bayside, Queens, under Samir's family's house for free, pretty much. You have Anton, the most responsible, gay, job-oriented character. You have Billy, who's sort of like a girl failure, where she thinks she's peaked in high school, and every episode sort of punishes her further, but she still tries to persevere. Issa, who is the fearless, reckless, high-spirited person of the group, who gets into all these types of misadventures and is always speaking her mind.
Mm-hmm.
Samir is very much a himbo in a way where he always means well, but is faced sort of like an arrested development for living in his family's house, so he doesn't know how to do much things as an adult. And Issa's boyfriend Paul Baker, who integrates himself within the group and sort of moves in, but he's also very fluid sexually, and it changes sort of that dynamic between the entire ensemble.
Mm-hmm. So, you sort of mentioned that it's this ragtag group of people. They're in their 20s. They're struggling with all the things that, people in their 20s do. How do you think it does at capturing kind of like the anxiety and the feelings of being in your 20s now?
I feel like the show does such a great job at speaking to the niche uh, idiosyncratic aspects of being an adult where we were raised very closely by our parents, so we don't know how to do things on our own. We're like fawn and just still walking up straight for the first time. So like dealing with medical bills for the first time, feeling that we're not secure enough in our jobs, um having to deal with like opening your own mail, not necessarily the paying rent part, because everybody lives there for free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, a lot of people are naturally comparing this to Friends or to Girls, another kind of seminal, show about being in your 20s. But you actually compared it to It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Why make that comparison?
I feel like the adult has the same structure and episodic nature of It's Always Sunny, where these friends who are operating on the same low brain cell levels with each other get into all these different types of misadventures that also speak to different social commentaries, that's so specific of being an adult, where it does feel like it's scratching an intrusive thought. Like there's an episode where Issa and Anton think that their deceased therapist committed suicide because of them. Um, then there's also just like all these different crazy gags, and every episode escalates to an outrageous area, yet feels so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
And outright zany to witness.
So the show is, it's still got a lot of room to grow, obviously. But do you like it? Like, it sounds like that you feel it really resonates. Do you think it's going to hit with an audience?
Oh yeah, it definitely hits with like everybody in their 20s right now who are really going through it, especially in a post-pandemic era where a lot of us had to grow up without much guidebook because the world was just so frightening in of itself. So now that we are adults in some capacity, we still have a lot of growing up to do. There's so many things about navigating the world that uh, we don't know, and it's nice to see a show where all these different characters who are just so silly and aren't really concerned about their finances and things like that, just being silly 20 somethings who are just trying to get by and have each other at the end of the day.
I love having this conversation. I hope that the show actually, is able to get some more traction and take off, because the first two episodes, liked it, but I want to see more for sure. Rendy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Rendy Jones is a freelance film and TV critic in New York. You can read their review of Adults in Paste, and you can start watching the show on Disney+. And that's it for the podcast today. Thank you so much for listening. You can check us out wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Emil Niazi, in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thank you so much.